Hi, everybody. Welcome. We are so happy that you're all here. We have architecture, we have interior design, we have graphic design, and Terry Ryan, an adjunct in the interior design department, and I have had wonderful experiences with study abroad, thanks to Janice, who's here to join us too today. And we've gone to Italy twice. Last year, 2023, we went to Naples, Pompeii, Milan. The year before, we went to Rome. We went to Florence, and we met an unbelievable human being. Matteo is here from Italy.
Thank you. Okay. But give me a bit just to, because I wrote down the transcription between feet and meters, so I have to read. But let's turn a bit off.
Do you want this up in the front?
Can you see? I can see. Yeah. Okay. So I don't know how long we're going to make it. I think by the time 5 people leave the room, I will start to ask myself if it's time to close it. But we're going to make a presentation that it's really, well, it's first of all unique for me because it's, I started to I know more or less what you do, but I had the chance to be with some of the group from the interior design, couple of architects, I think, in the past. And it's really a pity, like how do you gamble on teaching creative strategies in a couple of hours? So you are not going to see anything that has a direct technique. Like anything, you could literally skip my lecture and you're going to be just the same. However, I want to show you a bit of my methodology on how do I think out of the box. And to think out of the box includes for me that I come from Rome, which is a stratified context where history overimposes itself on conflicts and many layered issues. My way is to try to go deep into complexity and to but without lowering the scale. I actually do the opposite. So somebody thinks that the best way is to go really on a one-to-one scale to understand the detail of things. Me, once I understand what I like, I try to start from scratch. So today, at some point, we will hit also the Bible, the Genesis specifically. Don't worry, it's not going to be a religious talk. But what I mean is that we are trying to expand the field of something that looks simple, and which is specifically this little table here. Does any of you have any idea what this table could be? Anybody is familiar with an office, a studio, radical designer group called Super Studio? Has anybody heard about it? It's a radical group that started in Italy in the 60s. And when I say radical, I mean a group of architects and artists that believed that their profession was led through methods of working together which were radical. So no sitting around the table and just crafting things, but active talking, screaming, if needed, drugs on one side. Radical politically, meaning there is an assumption of our profession sometimes that because we have clients, we have to respond to the demands of clients. It's implied that we give back what the client wants, because if we don't give to the client what the client wants, we're not going to be paid. Well, there was a season, especially in the 60s, where radical architecture, radical design meant to propose things that either had zero functional value for the market, or at least they were questioning it. So the issue of radicality stands for anything that can put in doubt our assumption as a society. So this table here, that again, it really looks rather plain, actually is a reference to it was exhibited in, sorry, 1 second, last thing to say. This presentation was never done before. I did it as an effort to, because they met me as a guide. So they have, besides what the introduction said, that I do this and that, the reality is that they like me for what I explain them of things that I know. No, it's not through my method of creative thinking that they invited me here. That added. So my effort here is to guide you today in your territory. So I studied in the last couple of weeks to see a bit of what was relevant to my story of things happening in New Jersey that are relevant for the history of art, and especially to the history of art through which we can dissect that specific object. I have to admit that it's not only New Jersey. I put a couple of examples from New York City, but they're really small, and just because they were close and I couldn't avoid thinking that they were connected. And a couple of examples from France, because the story intersected. So in case I mispronounce some authors from New Jersey, please forgive me. In case you don't believe what I say, you have the right, because I never seen those places that I'm going to describe. Okay, so where was this table exposed? Anybody ever heard of the 1972 New Domestic Landscape Exhibition at Moma? It was the most, yes, you did. So this is also a bit of how I think you have to take this. Take some pictures once in a while, you take a note. You will understand fully the presentation only if you raise your hand and you interrupt me, because I'm going to give you, we're going to be on an intense path through things that you might never heard of. So you ask me, I interrupt, I go deep into it. So 1972 exhibition at Moma is, by my understanding, the most exciting exhibition ever done on radical architecture and design. Specifically, it was an exhibition, and now I'm becoming a bit patriotic, an exhibition of Italian design of the 60s and 70s. Examples, and it made history. It's a legendary exhibition that probably nobody actually saw, but it's a legendary. It's one of those that happens once per decade. So in that exhibition there were a lot of things. So this is a Bellini. It's a Kara Sutra. It's a concept to reinvent cars and to transform cars into dwelling and sexual spirit nomadic places. There was the you may know the Sacco Zanotta. Have you ever? You might be familiar with the sack. This sack was presented, and now it's ubiquitous. Every hotel lodge, no, maybe not anymore, but it's kind of a very important design. So this is the cover of the what is it called? The catalog. This is Joe Colombo. Have you ever heard of Joe Colombo? So this is an amazing called total furnishing unit, meaning all these problems that we were discussing this morning. I need a huge building to put things. No, actually you need this space, and you can have a fully functional house in a small lot. This is Sotsas. Maybe you're more familiar with this word, the interior designer. Maybe you heard about it. Another rather radical designer, artist, and architect. But we're not talking about them. I'm just showing you the type of artists which were exposed in the exhibition. But we go back to this. We go back to this very plain design, which is basically a grid. A grid repeat. Can you see well? Let me see if the next one. This is even better, maybe. You see, these artists, designers, architects, super studio, we're really in love with this grid. We're doing grids everywhere. But in the 70s, there is something that we started to forget about, which is the art and design were much more bridged together. Interior design was connected to fashion, and so design shows had performativity in it, and so this is a picture taken from a presentation of a project called Monumento Continuo, continuous monument. Sorry, I go with this. I think this is how our stories start to intersect New York and New Jersey a bit more. What's the story of this building? I don't know if you can tell there is a building or it has the scale of a city. Can you see this white part? So that little table that we've seen before, made of the tiny grids, it's part of this. It's part of a surreal, out-of-the-box, ridiculous infrastructure that was supposedly designed to take all the problems of urban form. So now we're going slightly a bit more into architecture and less into interior design, but to all the problems of society connected to urbanity were put in a big line that would travel the world. From here to there, it would be infinite. So it would even include all the biggest urban forms existing, such as New York. Why I'm showing this, it's nowadays it just seems a provocation and nothing really worth our attention. But this is how architecture, design produce thinking, produce ways of thinking that are different, epistemologies. You know, there are philosophers that think with concept and then they tell us and we appreciate them and we do something with it. Architects, designers play with images and plays with and can use the architecture beyond the functional value. Here there is no commissions, there is nobody that is ever going to build this, but it's an image that talks beyond the feasibility of it. And specifically, there are two images of Monumento Continuo that I want to discuss. So one is this. So this idea of an infinite space where urbanity can happen without creativity, without special occasions, all the same. A life Super Studio was giving from the radical leftist side, was trying to criticize the world we live in. These cookie cutter lives that we all have, the idea that we all live in cubicles, all this, it's a cubicle of ours. It could be a mental cubicle, a practical cubicle, a house, a building. But what they were interested in was a criticism of our society at the time, specifically the capitalist structure of our society. So I would say words that don't put on me the criticism. I'm the historian referencing to a criticism that might not be yours, might not be mine. But I'm intrigued by people capable of criticizing the assumption of where we live. So these people thought that within the boredom of our life, within the boredom of suburbia, the boredom of the highways in Europe, between the boredom of the life that repeats itself over and over, if you dig, there was actually something worth something. Specifically, a non-fertile ground. I don't know if you can tell that it's a non-fertile ground that would take, would require care and usage, and obviously younger generation. And so this, the most important of their picture was this one. So this continuous monument, obviously intersecting with something that is more familiar with you. I don't know if this is Utah or somewhere in between. It is Utah, okay. So this, it's done, obviously, this is not a, now we live in a moment with artificial intelligence, Photoshop. Here we're in a digital area, sorry, we're in an analog area. We're talking about how tiny little things such as juxtaposition and small collages can operate conceptually. If somebody does this now, we would say, okay, it's not that hard. But at the time, in the 60s, doing collages meant to take the very material base of our society, which is a mediatic society, cut it all out and transform the society we live in, that in their idea was boring, and transform it as a creative device to talk about something else. So the juxtaposition between the desert and this infinite expansion of the city, it's a self-critical. Nobody really wanted to build this building, you know. This is an hyperbole. It's an absurdity that talks about the problem of our society. If somebody eventually might end up doing this, we are in big troubles. But this also talks, at least to me and to them, once we will read a bit, there is, I can take from an historian of art from Italy called Zeveri, a definition of the monumento continuo, which is, Superstudio uses architecture as a critical means that leads it to merge together with nature in a single project, thus implementing a path of hybridization that unites men in a state of harmony and balance with the environment surrounding. Architecture becomes an open work characterized by an ambiguous approach and non-solution. This is very important. Non-solution, the opposite of what we are usually asked to do. We have this problem, can you fix it? Critical architecture, critical design at the time was for non-solution. A work in progress, in constant tension, due to the multiplicity of possible readings. So it's a different idea of what architecture, what design stands for. It produces criticality. It is a political body. But anyway, to them, the real issue at stake was something that has to do with this. Nomadism. I don't know if this, I mean, yes, you can see the image. It's a nomadic tribe. I actually don't know where this picture was taken. I apologize. But anybody familiar with this building nowadays? It's a render. You are. Would you mind sharing what it is? Those of you that know it. So I'm showing it because this comes from this. It's a direct visual consequence, except it's on the opposite spectrum of criticism. Here it is the way that a a non-democratic state, we can say. I don't want to know your opinion on Saudi Arabia, but a critical place that it's based on lack of self-criticism, that takes what is considered within the history of architecture and design from the 60s and 70s, the most radical art production, and it transforms it into just the way things are. So this is a construction site, this is a render, and this is the construction site of this few miles long city. And the idea is, it's part also on the history of architecture, the idea of the linear city, that we don't go into that, but anybody has questions we can answer. But this is a construction site of the few miles long, ridiculous infrastructure in the middle of the desert, to whom I have a very biased disrespect, but thankfully we're not going to talk about that. But I want you to focus on few things. I mean, this presentation will have a series of reminders that are photographic reminders. Why? Because we think with images. We don't only think with words. So this is how the construction site looks now, and by the end of the presentation we will understand we'll see something else. So what really Superstudio were questioning is the basic of our society. When we do architecture, what it is, when we do interior design, when we do anything that has to do with planning, projecting, defining, crafting, are we doing something for a sedentary culture, that it's our assumption, or are we doing something that can accept the possibility of nomadism? I'm taking this picture from a book that it's here, it's Walkscape. It's a very nice book from which I took, well, 10% of the images and references by a writer called Careri. It's in English, it's quite easy to read, which tells an alternative story of our society if architecture was not made for sedentary culture. What would it be? So I'm using this book for a bit of introduction of how we move from the initial design. So I go back. We started with this. And this, which is just a stool, a small stool, black and white, simple as hell. It's a grid. How can we analyze it? How can we project it? How can we expand the fields that this tool operates into? So, because we don't have time to go through the history of Super Studio, you have to believe me that they have a criticism of sedentary culture. And so now we're going to go analyzing what if this was a criticism of the society we live in, and what if we take it from the perspective of nomadism, nomadic tribes. That's why all this long introduction. And believe it or not, so this is, now we can understand better this initial picture. That's how they represented, how they portrayed it in magazines to sell it. That's how they sell it. And clearly, we are not in the environment. They're not meant for lobbies of hotels. They're not meant for indoor. They are in public space, not even public space. This is a countryside, olive trees around it. So that's how artists and designers thought about, you know, defining their realm of competence. And for them, which was criticality and outside of the given context where architecture and design is expected. So now we can understand maybe better this. Bam, ba, bam, ba, bam. So we have to go back. So keeping in mind, what if we were in a society that worked for nomadism? We have to start with the Bible. Are you familiar with Cain and Abel? Cain and Abel. Doesn't anybody know this? Sorry. Does anybody know the story of that? Well, but please tell me so that you say it, so we hear different voices. We're good. So this is a painting by Titian at the Galleria what is it called? Accademia in Venice. But that's not the point. I want to think of how important, so even more than the polarity between Adam and Eve, that polarity, meaning that division between two non-communicating sides of our society, has been very important for our profession. So the two basically were arguing what type of society the world had to have. Should we just be shepherds? Shall we have agricultural soil? Shall we put boundaries? Shall we have walls? All this conversation this morning about walls. What is that line? What is that line that we craft on the paper? Can it be a flexible line? Can it be used to accept a bit of flexibility of usage? So, in the Bible, the problem is that one of the two kills the other, and it's and so the relationship between agriculture and well, shepherds. What do shepherds do? I write down this. Husbandry. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I wrote it, but I couldn't see it. So husbandry and agriculture is the first big conflict of our society. And then there are many others that started in a different way. And In the Bible, it's resolved like this. I take the Bible, I'm not a Christian person, sorry. But I like, because it's a good book where we can understand the assumption of our society. So things that we take for granted. Why wasn't the other way around? Why wasn't the shepherd killing the farmer, yes. So after one got killed, what happens is that God obliged Cain to eternal wandering, which is for us, that we like our routine, we like to go back to our houses, we like property, we like to go back to our families, and it's terrible. I have to walk my entire life and I cannot go back to my loved ones. That's what that was the condemnation. So there are very different readings of that, so we're not going to go into Bible studies now, but I want you to be aware that that's one of the first critical points of the society you live in. What is the punishment that God gives? Be a nomad. Oh my goodness! And so we can go back, and this I'm going back through the lenses of this author of the book, which is Walkscapes, that really ask itself, is our society, or more specifically, is architecture for sedentary culture, or is it for nomadic tribes? We take for granted that it's not for nomadic tribes, but maybe it's not true. Are you familiar with megalithical society? You know, do you know that we barely know anything of their technology? So we have no clue of all the negative parts, you know, the functionality behind these stones. We don't know if they served as temples, if they served as path. We don't know much. We don't know much. But what we know is we know how how tribal societies in some parts of the world, tribal, maybe it's not the right word in English, so please forgive me if I'm saying something that to some sensibility could be offensive. Societies that are still existing, that live in a different way compared to the assumed Western world. So different epistemologies. In other societies, such as the Aboriginal, thank you very much. In Aboriginal society, the path is everything. The knowledge of the world comes from description of pathways in between one place and the other. Through the lenses of Ruchatwin, we understand a symbol that existed in all societies for wandering, for eternal wandering, which is this one. This one is a symbol that you can find in all these iterations in Australia, in Latin America, or pre-Latin Latin America, North America, Europe, Asia. There is always a symbol that can be found in those menhir. Menhir means big rock. So in every menhir, not every, but many menhir has at some point this. So this is exactly what you can imagine Cain having to do. You know, he was a criminal. He killed his twin. He was traveling the world. Couldn't go back home. Didn't speak the same language of anybody else. All he had to do was not to be killed. Was to say, I come here for peace. So the idea of peace and of this symbol, which is Francesco Careri called it K-A, symbol of eternal wandering, is the ultimate universal symbol for understandment. And it's understandment between people that don't think alike. Now, why am I talking about that? I know that it seems that I'm going out of the topic, But if we want to read it through a graphical perspective, there is not any other symbol in the world that anybody can understand as a symbol of peace. Even the simple assumption that we have that this stands for yes and this stands for no, you very much know probably. I mean, I know that somebody, but you know that this is not yes and no, for instance, at least not in Mumbai, if I'm correct. Okay, so it's very complicated to find a graphic symbol that is semi-universal, and this is it. And this graphic symbol can tell us a different story of architecture and interior design. So we go through this. This is a terrible picture, not of mine, but just because mine was worse, of Careri. This is an alignment of 35,000 menhir, 35,000 stones that are impossible to be removed based on the technology that we think that they had. And it's an alignment, means, and there are nobody's buried there, there is no sign of usage anywhere in the surroundings, so it's literally a road. So a temple as a road. It's really the opposite of what we think nowadays, you know, like the road, it's the functional connection between two places that has a purpose. But if we go to the megalithic society, we see this assumption completely twisted. Maybe the places were just places without much importance, and the architecture, the design, the planning was in the connection. This is, again, not super easy to accept mentally, just because it's really not what we've been taking as an assumption of our society. So I would like to read, are you familiar with Gideon, an historian of architecture? So this is a temple in Egypt. And I go one sec, it's called Karnak. Karnak. And nobody had any idea why it was called Karnak. So I read Gideon. So if I say Gideon, it's not my opinion, it's easy. The beginning of stone architecture, is bound up with the concept of Ka. The temple of Amun in Karnak in Egypt is the most important contribution to the history of architecture. I didn't invent that, it's not ChatGPT, it's Gideon. It is not a gathering space for a congregation of the devout. It is not a resting place. It is simply a most monumentally conceived place of passage. So, this means a lot of things. First, it's a very important example to know, especially for the interior designers. The Temple of Karnak has been studied throughout the centuries, and it's a ridiculous space because people never really understood why. Those are not tables. This is not a balloon, an hotel lounge room. These are all columns. All these little circles are columns. So even though it is the most ancient of the temples ever found in Egypt, it has no functional value. How is it possible? How can you build such an enormous temple and not having any space to use it? So this is Gideon in 1964. Sorry, I forgot to read it. 1964, writing that, and it had an influence of people studying in 1966, 68 across the world, what later would become the radical designers, because they, with this text, which by the way didn't have a lot of importance in Europe, in the States, this passage doesn't exist in the edition in America. It does in the English one for London. So this passage was mind-blowing for young architects. So if even the Egyptian that we study so much are putting so much effort in that, why is our architecture just for resting? Why do we put only tables and rooms and beds? Why don't we put picnic areas inside our architecture? So this is a very critical point for history of architecture, but especially for the young student of architecture your age in the 60s. Before 68, so they were entering the 68 movement, and you know 68 was a critical point, but blossoming for thinking out of the box assumption of our society. 68? We have it, no? Berkeley movements, we're all familiar with that. Yes. No? I'm fine. I mean, please tell me if it's, does it make sense or no sense? 60. When I say May 68, does it make any sense?
Anti-war protests, all of that, right?
Yeah.
Turning society.
Well, I think in 200 years, when people will read a history of the United States, they will mention, they will forget a lot of things, but they will mention probably the yes, and they will certainly mention that Berkeley was the beginning of a world movement which was against war and against patriarchy, against pyramidical structures, against, well, all convention. And you should be proud, you know, it's not that common, you know, it's one of the greatest contributions that the United States gave to the world. So that, so it's yes, arguably, yes, sorry. That's me putting my personal views on it. But at the same time, I'm using this to bridge it with something that was happening not at the same years. This is, but we finish with something that was happening in the same years in France. Because the two epicenters of 68 were Berkeley and Paris, Sorbonne. Are you familiar with Dada? Dadaism? Yes? Fantastic. So, Dada, which is an infinite font with the surreal movement of creativity, thinking out of the box, rejecting any convention in any possible context, and you can still nowadays take as an exercise book of Dadaist, copy it, and it still will operate at its full speed for your project. Like if you want to think out of the box, go into a cadavre esquisite, do their exercises. But I want to talk about one specific excursion, which is called first visit to a boring place, because it's how Dada, which is, so we are looking at how, sorry, I have to go back because then we lose ourselves. We are analyzing this, and we are understanding what is the complexity behind this simple, stupid stool, black and white. Well, to understand it, we have to dissect the history of art and issues that were important for them when they made it, and how people understand it in 72 and nowadays too. And among that, there was the Dadaist spirit of being anti-conformist and being anti-conventional, and especially being anti-art and anti-architecture. Can we learn something as architects, designers, and from people that despise us? I don't know. I can. But it requires some mental open. We need to be open to criticism. We need to accept the possibility of somebody else telling us that we are on the wrong side of society, and by doing. Yeah, that's before. No, I was saying this. It's Cabaret Voltaire in 1915, 1916 in Zurich. No, thanks for the assumption. There is a white page just because they're not at this in the same years. I meant to say the little parenthesis in Paris ends in 68 as well of this presentation. No, Dada is in between the war during World War I. And it's true, if you don't know what Dada is, it's complicated. But write it down and take some time later on to explore. But Dada, as a word, it's both what a Russian baby would say, the first word that it would learn, Dada, yes, yes. But it's also a sound that really, it's just onomatopoeic, da 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 da, and all the other avant-gardes of the 20th century all had this very cool name: surrealism, cubism, futurism, the Malevich one, I forgot, constructivism. They all had, which is the base of our design education, by the way, also yours. And Dadaist people believing in Dada felt that all the construction of our society were just stupid, because if a society that leads to war is stupid, so to deconstruct, so it's no-brainer that we have to destroy the society we live in if it leads to war. If everybody is fighting with each other, why are we reproducing the society we live in if it leads to war? So thank you very much for the question, because otherwise, so as you've seen, interrupt me, because only through interruption we can go deep into the complexity. So Dada is a wonderful movement, famous for doing things we were just unexpected. It was very famous to do abstract poetry, like this. This is a classical techniques by Dada. Sorry, I didn't rehearse it before. But if you put words together randomly, you obtain something that it's worthwhile knowing, because at least it's produced by a mental stream that it's not the one that we are accustomed to. It's literally the opposite of what happens with ChatGPT, that it's a condensation of common sense. You know, like that there is, instead Dada believes in the opposite. We don't like our society, so let's just play with it. Let's destroy it and explode it. I'm not going to read it because it didn't come out well. No, it's really that I have to put a bit more effort. Even as a Dadaist, I have to put more effort. So, but Dada is a wonderful reference for all of us to know. But I want to focus on one example of Dada that happened in Paris, not in Zurich, where it started, and it is the first so-called anti-walk, anti-architecture. That's how they called it: anti-walk, anti-architecture. 14th of April, so very soon. We can celebrate it if you want. 1921. So after the war. There is no, everybody imagine 1918, everybody's starting to go back to the routine. Now we have to rebuild, but wasn't that society, weren't we supposed to destroy our society? Yes, but there is no time, we have to build, we have to build, we have to build, we have to produce, we have to produce. So they're really going crazy. And they're like, how can you not remember that we were like fighting only 3 years ago? So they propose an amazing, ridiculous, and absolutely irrelevant in the history of art performance that only recently was rediscovered. So they go 9 men that I forgot. So there is Jean Crotti, Breton, Rigaud, Ellure, Ribot, Dessaigne, Perret, Frankel, Aragon, Tzara. The only there are only two that are very important, Breton and Sarah, and the last one is Soupeau. I read them because they really didn't make history of art, so it's important to read them today. Only two of them, Sarah and Breton. And it's important to understand what they did. So they convinced a bunch of people to go for a walk in front of the most boring of the places they could think of, and trying to add no meaning to them and get bored while doing it. Like, how is this art? It's arguable, but that's what they tried to do. And when they were confronted with, how do we represent this and why are we doing it? So let's go back for a second. A Dadaist spirit was a critique of our society. How do we criticize our society? If we have fun, people might like it, people might agree with us. We don't want that. You know, fun, entertainment is part of our society as well. Not to think of wars, we entertain ourselves. Not to think of the criticality of our life, we entertain ourselves. So they really thought of, let's get bored. And let's do that with the right spirit. So we wake up at 5 a.m., we get bored, and nobody will know about that. So, and the presentation will be a lot about that later, the future images. But they do this with extreme poetry, which is, they only publish this picture of them the day after on a magazine. And it's this picture which they print over and over it, so that it's so very poetically, the object of their disgust disappears behind them. So imagine you read, well, I don't know, New York Times, I don't know what you read here, and the day after their walk, they pay this big advertisement just to write, "We did it." And they have this picture. That's it. There was no galleries behind, no. So it's, for me, this is, now I'm going to lose all your appreciation, but this is my favorite piece of art. Also because it doesn't deal with communication directly, it's not looking to be sold, and it has that incredible spirit of existing almost only in the memories of those that did it. So when we think of, you know, this morning a lot of you were sharing those texts saying, experience, I want you to experience that, the Bollywood experience. Experiences are about also how do you create a special feeling. And so I'm an architect in a sense that I design experiences, and there is nothing like the disappearance of an ugly, obsolete building like the one they did that shows more how I can perform architecture. I know that you will never ask to disappear a building, but there is a lot to learn from here. So this opens up something that you get. I put this text like this just because I know that we are not going to go into it, but I want you to be aware that from the perspective of Super Studio and a lot of the avant-garde in New York as well, there was one important movement of avant-garde art after the war, which was the Situationist movement. I don't know how many, it's just to have, are you familiar with Eyal Weizmann? Anybody ever heard of Eyal Weizmann? Anybody ever heard of, yes? No? No, sorry. It's such an it's called psychogeography. So it's an idea that some artist had that geography, it's not what it is and how you design it, but it's the way you perceive it. And believe it or not, the American military theoreticians, European NATO members, these artists are very present in the discourse on how you do counter-guerrilla architecture fights. Like yeah, but if nobody knows about situationism, I will skip this part because it's, you know, when I say this sentence, people are like, oh, no way. But if you don't know the situationist, but write down situationist and Debord. Guy Debord, D-E-B-O-R-D. It's the theoretician. They wrote an amazing book called La Société du Spectacle, Society of Spectacle, which is, we are getting close to how we arrive in New Jersey, by the way, because it's the inspiration for Rem Koolhaas' book, Delirious New York, which I hope the architects at least read. Delirious New York? Have you heard of Delirious New York as a book? Heard, not read. Heard? Maybe? No. Well, it's a retroactive manifesto for New York City, built on French literature, and especially Guy Debord and Dali idea of what a city is, and how art is connected to cities and so much and so forth. So, okay, I will skip that, but just be aware that the history of architectural discourse on New York is very much related to this guy called Guy Debord, that wrote this Society of Spectacle, which is a harsh criticism of the society we live in, a society of the way things are written, the way things are experienced, and how we live in a show. We all live in a show. It's not just based on what this guy wrote. It's not just that we watch a lot of TV, it's that we are self-entertained. Our psychological idiosyncrasies are too big to spend few hours alone without doing anything. I cannot stay sitting without reading or watching a movie or chatting with somebody on the phone, because I'm in constant conflict with myself in the society I live in. If for 1 second I ask myself, is this the place that I would like to be, and is this what I want to contribute to, I would probably throw myself out of a window. So that's Society of Spectacle. It's a harsh criticism of the assumption of our society, but most especially how we are we are voluntary prisoners of the society we live in. That doesn't, it's not about whether you are a libertarian, an anarchist, a communist, I don't care. It's about, that feeling of not wanting to really criticize what you're doing, and just for a second you just want to be entertained. So this issue of entertainment, it's very strong in the criticism that was done, and that now we hit it in New Jersey. Oh, so, little break. New Jersey Turnpike. Please tell me that some of you know the New Jersey Turnpike. This I have to read a bit, because obviously, I mean, this week was the first time that I've ever entered the New Jersey Turnpike. A month ago, when I proposed an activity to Celeste and Terry, I said, I would like to go for a walk in the New Jersey Turnpike. And they obviously looked at me like, you're crazy, why would you ever do that? But now we enter into the reason why I proposed it. And so there are a series of factors that we can take from, so now we are going towards there, but let's go for a second back here. Psychogeography and theory della derive, the idea of the issue of boredom, the issue of conflict against the society we live in. There is a certain moment that from avant-garde times, by avant-garde I mean art done on a piece of paper, art done for a gallery, art and design, sorry, I say art, but they are mutually relevant. Compositions for clients, for the market. At some point, people got fed up in the 60s. In the 60s, people couldn't take it anymore. Somebody was not willing to accept anymore the rigid boxes of our society, and decided to step out. To step out is it requires some conceptual drive, but also practically mean to go out of the video, out of the text, out of the drawing, and be in the society that already exists. This morning with some of you I used the example of you can design for a month the perfect curtain, but what happens if you have to, the moment you think about it, you have to do it in 1 hour. So that was just an example of what we debated today, so you understand how it relates also to our profession. But the reality is that there is a clash that happens in Europe and in the States, in design, in art, in the 60s. Reality is so much more interesting than the model of the society we imagined, and so to go out of it, we have to leave the table, we have to leave the entertainment, and we just have to explore. Exploration conceptually starts from this picture, but practically means let me go out of the suburb of quiet life that I found for myself, and let me see what's around me. So this picture, it's taken, I think, 69, but I have to double check. By the way, this is not a minor, irrelevant photo in the history of art. This was this appeared in 1966 in Art Forum, which at the time and even now is the Bible of art. Is where things are decided to be artsy or not. It takes Cooper Union students of art and architecture. Cooper Union. So we are among our peers. And Tony Smith decides this moment of going out of the studio, out of the craft, as the ineffable ecstasy that that I call the end of art. Bah, a bit rhetoric, but he writes in the Art Forum. He goes to the New Jersey Turnpike to take this picture before it gets inaugurated. So it's what he calls a space in between. Before having a functional usage, it has already an impact on our lives, on the landscape, on nature, and yet it has no functionality. Therefore, it's a playground. Therefore, you can do whatever you want with it. The road and much of the landscape was artificial, yet it couldn't be called a work of art. A long black road made of dark pavement moving through the flat landscape. A clear, simple observation that deals with the essence of our context. You even may say of your profession. So, Tony Smith, with his students, thought that literally this was the end of his past life and the beginning of a new moment for everybody else. Cooper Union, not a second league university, like it's an important one that sets, at the time was kind of setting the standards. There is no point in visiting it, except if we take it very much, I take it as a pyramid. I take it as, like if you go to Cairo or Giza, you see some monumental architecture compositions that have no reason whatsoever to exist in our society. They have no meaning to me. They're not connected to what I believe in. And they're not even that special architecturally, maybe inside, but from the outside, they're not my style at least. And so they're a monument of a specific moment in history that something different happened. So I would like you to be proud of that. Believe it or not, that next to where you live, there is this little object that means a lot. In Europe, we talk about that all the time, and that's why I wanted to visit it. But there are a lot of secondary buildings in Rome that I guide people through, and I explain everything about the order. There are nothing more important than this. as because this represents a specific moment of our society, meaning the beginning of the New Jersey Turnpike, and a specific moment of the criticism done by art of our society. But how did this influence the world of art in New Jersey? You can use your own tech capacity, your own craft, your inventiveness to design interior spaces and just put it out in the public space. Out in public space doesn't mean, obviously, just to put it out. It means to confront the political value of your profession. He was not allowed to put these things in public space. I don't know necessarily what happens to them, but I'm putting Ugo La Pietra, which for me it's one of the most interesting designers that here for Triennale Milano as a project just shaved himself in public space in '69. Because I want us to understand that that example of the turnpike, it's a radical example that's come from New Jersey. So the world is looking at New Jersey as, they discovered something incredible. But throughout the world, people were reinterpreting it as, we have to go out of our studios. We have to go out of our professions. We have to be in public space. Public space is the place to experiment and to confront ourselves with the rest of the world and to reinvent without over-designing. I'm using another example from New York. This is not New Jersey, this is New York, New York. I don't know if you ever heard of Vito Acconci, a very important designer. You know Vito Acconci? Okay. Vito Acconci is a very famous designer that did something, this did. Aren't you familiar with the Stephen Hall and Vito Acconci collaboration, the storefront art and architecture? You know Stephen Hall? Stephen Hall. Stephen Hall. Stephen Hall. Okay, this is the most. Sorry, no. I'm putting these examples because I want you kind of to believe that this picture that I'm showing comes from our artistic backgrounds of very famous designers that used art and this process of doing anti-art and walks that in this research fed their work as an architect too. This is one of the most simple and yet most precious little gallery in New York. It doesn't exist as it is now. Now it's a bit different. But it's really just this morning we were talking about walls that can have multiple depths and multiple flexibility. So these artists that I'm going to describe in collaboration with Stephen Hall designed this. And this was the spot to be in the 80s and 90s New York for the architecture and design discourse. This was storefront art and architecture. But what did this guy do before becoming an established designer? This piece, 69, is called Follow Different Person Every Day Until Person Enter Private Place. That's what the work is called. Those are documentation from a work that lasted almost a year. So every day, you're a designer and you don't have really the right ideas so this guy, Vito Acconci, just followed people in New York City till they enter somewhere else. So why am I showing it? Obviously, I want us to understand that art has to be critical to our society. So the assumption that you cannot touch privacy, well, it's an assumption that this guy didn't accept. But especially that walking practice was part of the research of many designers. So walking, if you follow somebody else, means that you're not in control. We can draw, as architects, we can define the corridor, how people enter, the concierge is on the left, and the room is on the right. If you follow somebody else's lead, you have a totally different approach on life that it's from the vantage point of being the observer, not the designer, not the maker directly. And this, when you're stuck in an idea, just give it away. Pass it around, ask an opinion to somebody else. Detach yourself from the control of your own work. This is just, sometimes it's idiotic, assuming that we can fix things, we have the best ideas, even if we are geniuses. And statistically, I'm sorry, but none of us is a genius. It's better to seek all the possible strategy to let somebody else enter your brain process. So this guy made it in such a sophistication and provocation. He got in trouble a few times with police, obviously, but there were different moments in New York. He did some in New Jersey too, so it was a long, long project. But also Fluxus. Are you familiar with Fluxus? A bit? No? Then I jump, sorry. Just because New York and was a center of this exploration, and especially was a center of the United States were a center of this understanding that I think sculpture, art, design, architecture sometimes can be really can be taken to its limits and almost evaporate. Remember the first picture of the disappeared building? So this guy, Richard Long, a Californian artist, and this is not in New Jersey, sorry, but in my head it's the same country. So this is a very simple work that also on Art Forum was considered. After Tommy Lee Smith, this is the most incredible work of art ever produced. That's also quoted. Let me see if I have a quote from that article. No, I actually don't. Never mind. But a line made by walking, it means what it is. So it means this. Do you see any line there? No, you don't. I know you don't. Conceptually, you see, no, you're seeing, hold on, I'm not looking at the line made by the architect. I'm saying that conceptually, Richard Long proposed to the world that a line like the line you craft in your plants, it can have, it could be so diverse, and it could span for half a day, for a month, for a lifetime. A wall, it could be, so this is a temporary wall. You know, this is the photo taken few minutes after this guy walked, few seconds after Richard Long walked this path. And so you see it. You pass after 2 minutes and this line is gone. Is this architecture? For me, yes. So for me, it is in multiple ways. It is because it's described as such, just as much as your projects, even though they are not going to be built, they still are architectural production, epistemological endeavors that are worth the consideration within an architectural context. So this is also a sign. Is it art? Is it performing arts only? This debate animates furiously till today the artistic context, but even in art. In architecture faculties in Rome, I often ask students to do invisible works. So, no. Invisible works means, so all these examples has to do with what's the value of criticism within our society. Like, I know that once a client asks you to build a house, you're not going to do that. We all agree on that. Huh? And also to me, when they ask me a work with a deadline, I try to accept what they're asking. But I cannot force myself to take for granted the assumption that the commission has. So any examples for me that make me think out of the box are really valuable. And so about this, so this Richard Long line made by walking provoked an explosion in the debate. And literally on Art Forum they were saying it's not possible, the world of art and design is going crazy. After that freak Tony Smith, now we have to even accept that not only we're just visiting an architecture, now there is even a possibility of considering architecture, sculpture, something that it's nothing. Where will we go? So and so this guy, which is Heiser, this is also not here. This is in Nevada, and I don't know if you remember one of the first pictures that we were dealing with of the construction site in the desert for in Saudi Arabia. The desert in the United States was the place, obviously for an insane amount of proactive thoughts of expansionism going through the West and colonization, etc., etc. But in our little parenthesis, which is understanding the role of walk for architecture, it was very important. And so this guy, Michael Heiser, did this work that for me it's conceptually very, very strong, which is called double negative. Let me see if I find the description of double negative. If not, because he writes something very nice about it. No, it doesn't. Double negative is a canyon, artificial canyon built within a negative canyon. A moment of the history of this. I hope you accept that this is architecture. Can we agree that in terms of scale, in terms of movement of soil, in terms of planning, in terms of authorization, in terms of everything that characterizes the day-to-day activity of an architect, this is architecture? Can we agree with that? Okay. So, he was an artist, a so-called land artist, which is a type of art that only existed here in the United States. So doing a double negative meant that this is the canyon or the valley, and he builds, sorry, it's very bad on the screen. Oh, bad, doesn't matter. Here you see it better, I hope. So on a valley, you put another negative architecture, and the double negative, so that's when it becomes for me particularly interesting. So the place of worship is the intersection of two negative spaces. So the only space that wasn't actually planned is the consequences of a double cut. Does it make sense what I said? I said it again. Yes? So let's say, so this is the valley, the desert, as it is. This guy builds two canyon within the canyon. But once it inaugurates it, doesn't call it a canyon on top of a canyon. He's interested only in the invisible intersection of two invisible negative spaces, and the double negative is this. So he organizes events here, where, again, an invisible architectural space, which has to do with, sorry for, but I think it's very important, not just because it's not too far from here, but because it really shows how we can, like, as soon as we understand these basic inputs that are more or less always the same. Okay, you always think of the positive space, but if you twist your head and you think, the positive space has a negative side, and it's so much nicer to look at the negative side. I'm talking to you all the time like this, but if I talked like this all the time, it would have been so much more interesting, maybe, or differently interesting. All these spaces shows how creativity is built on the inversion of the little assumption that we have. So this is working really creatively with the double negative space. This is about the space that it's invisible and temporary and it's ephemeral, that it's connected only to the use value. This morning we were discussing whether a ballroom had to have 10 tables or 20. The reality is a ballroom will always be about how do you dance inside of it. So as architects, interior designer, whatever, we don't have to necessarily think only of how do I draft, how do I draw the idea that the client has of how people dance. I have to design a space that gives me the desire to dance. That I have to work on this. I have to work on what better than a field invites us to go for a walk. That's what we're learning from that. It's not the line that matters anymore. It's by not doing and waiting for things to communicate to you, you can understand and just accept the context to give you inputs. So Pine Barrens, as one of the coolest sentences in the history of art was first pronounced, which is perception is prior to conception. Is Robert Smithson saying that? A land artist living here in the area that is famous for two works in New York, but costume to New Jersey, using New Jersey a lot to explore and to really think differently. And we're going to finish our slideshow with him, but a bit understanding what, again, he wrote on Art Forum. I use Art Forum because it's from here. In Italy, I wouldn't quote Art Forum, but based on my my desire to give really a site-specific lecture for you here, I had to go through text that I normally wouldn't read. I would obviously use an Italian version of it. One should not impose on Art Forum, he writes, but rather expose, not impose, but expose the site, be it interior or exterior. Interiors might be treated as exteriors and vice versa. This is from 1967, towards the development of an air terminal site. I have to explain it better. Somebody calls him to develop the air terminal site in Texas, in Dallas, Fort Worth, before it was built. They invite this guy. Can you design for us the new air terminal? And what would you do? What would you do? Like if they called you from Texas to build a new air terminal, what would be your strategy? Take a piece of land, yes. Get some references. Instead, he takes the car, goes out of Manhattan, goes to Pine Barrens, and spends a day there, and decides to conceive the project while in Pine Barrens. Why? There is no why. There is no why. There is no why. It's not a question that should interest you if you want to think out of the box and if you want to have a different sensibility. And the different sensibility in this case is connected to, I want the soil to tell me what to do, but even if it's an abstract idea of what a soil is. Pine Barrens, it's not Dallas. He knows it. But I want to understand it because nobody ever asked me to build an airport. And if somebody asked me to build an airport, I would never think of going to Pine Barrens to ponder on what the air terminal should be. But that's why it's so strong. And this is the picture which was part of what was given to the commissioner of the air terminal. This. Probably he already thought that he was not going to get the work. He probably decided to decline, I'm sure. He probably thought that it was not the right thing in the times of his career, but it doesn't matter. Those are side by biographical issues that I'm not concerned by. I'm interested in how do we think differently and what can we use to not be stuck in our own thought, in the paper, in the crafting material that we normally use, because it's very comforting to be with ourselves in front of the computer. I like myself a lot. Do you like yours? Do you like yourself? Like, you know, the way you think, it's always very nice, and you always think to be super to have a very strong hedgy thought. The reality is that we need instead to design occasions to go out of ourselves, possibly avoiding too much drugs, like to really do it methodologically. I mean, going out of ourselves doesn't mean to get wasted. I want it to be clear. Going out of yourself means to find inputs that are not on site or on the place or in your mental context. I finish with this, which is the ultimate of the guides through New Jersey, done by Robert Smithson, and I have to read what he writes. This is called, have you ever been to Passaic? Yeah, Passaic, sorry. So he starts like this in 1967. What can you find in Passaic that you cannot find in Paris, London, or Rome? Find out for yourself. Discover, if you dare, the breathtaking Passaic River and the eternal monuments on its enchanted banks. Ride in rent-a-car comfort to land that time forgot. Only minutes from New York City, Robert Smithson will guide you through this fabled series of sites. And don't forget your camera. Special maps come with each tour. For more information, visit One Gallery, 29 West 57th Street. So, this, believe it or not, is the Sistine Chapel of New Jersey. This picture right here is why people in Europe, in a contemporary art and design book, would quote New Jersey. It's the reason why art people discovered the concept of the post-industrial photography. You know, post-industrial photography, it starts here in Passaic. It was not a fashionable nor artsy aesthetic, specifically with this picture here. So what is this tour? This tour is a series of walks in monuments that are actually leftovers of our society, scrap material, things that matter for no one, things that are maybe ugly from a given perspective, but because they are out of order, obsolete, they are emancipated. You remember the discussion on that we were having at the beginning of the conversation on the importance of critical thinking is to question, and eventually to disrupt the linearity that our work has with the society we live in. Well, in Passaic, those objects which had no value anymore, or certainly not aesthetic value, they were ugly. If the viewer, Robert Smithson, was capable of reinventing his position, like reinventing the way he was looking at things that he took for granted were not pretty, then he would have freed those objects from the contradiction they were in. Those are objects that can be saved again. Dada spirit was about that. Have you ever heard of Duchamp? Anybody Duchamp? Okay. So Duchamp invented a very basic concept, which is the ready-made. You take an object that belongs to an office, you put it on the wall, it's an artwork. It was not that simple, but I can simplify it like this. So ready-made, so things that are already in society, once you put it out of their context, they become art, they become design, they become something else. This works both in art, design, and architecture. It's the ready-made concept functions everywhere. But here it's a bit different. Here is about the ontology. Sorry, ontology is a tough word. The essence of those objects which were scrap. It's a scrap landscape. You know, it's that part of New Jersey that people don't even look at and can't wait to enter into a highway where there are pine trees around. That area where you just want to be focused and you don't want to look around. So this is really it's the dumpster of our society, you know, like it's a landscape that nobody wants. So either as a society you're capable of taking care of it and you find a solution to it, because this is polluting visually, practically, working there. It's certainly better to work in a nice plaza in New York than working here, isn't it? So if our society is not capable of dealing with its leftovers and its dumpsters, then it's us, members of our society, that have to learn how to reorient themselves according to the society we created and oblige ourselves to decide that those are monuments. It's a bit hippie. It's a bit hippie. I know. But if you think about it carefully, it gives us in the practical means of our profession, it gives us infinite places to attach ourselves. There is obviously the problem of context. Context it's always a nightmare, no? Like this morning I've seen a series of presentations where everybody, like we traveled the world and everybody picked a context which was there, here, and very few nearby here. I'm trying to say, look, I know you were expecting a presentation on the history of Renaissance or something from Italy. I'm trying actually to relocate my knowledge here in this context. I'm trying to say, hold on, there is something to learn anywhere, and there is certainly something to learn from the history of art in this given context, but there also when we design, the idea of an ideal context, an ideal site, it's so modernist and old. It's not our generation. We have to deal with the best that we can. So we have to think of not the best site, but we have to think of how to enhance what we have. And this comes from us first, before projecting concept, billboards, moon boards or whatever, which is important, you have to do it. But at some point, once you know the technique, you have to step back and think, okay, before I put me in the story of this landscape, that it's few thousand years old, at least 500 of modern times, how can I change the way I think society, and therefore how can I change my preconceived idea of my interior space, my architecture, my design in relationship with what the context has to offer me? And there is not many other places in the world that were so strong in teaching this to the world, like this work in Passaic. I don't know if people goes in pilgrims as pilgrims there. I don't think so. I don't think so. But but they should, because this had at least on my generation an impact that it's not even sorry, Michelangelo's impact is not comparable to this. Not comparable. Absolutely, absolutely not comparable. I love Michelangelo, and it took me a few years to study and then eventually to study it to the point that I can share with others. But not necessarily this example, but another one that it's simple really changed the way I think. So I think I will finish here. You're very welcome.
Yeah. Do you think it's taken in like kind of the same way on purpose?
We can think about it together. I don't know. Let's think. First of all, this is 1972. The previous one it's 1966. So 6 years before that one. This I put it before in the presentation because I was trying to start with a random object and see what it was connected to from the past. In any case, yes, I think that there are a series of implied, so there is a similar aesthetics. So this is an Italian studio, an Italian office, radical office, somehow playing with the idea of Western movies. You're familiar with it, with the fact that Westerns were B movies until an Italian, Sergio Leone. So Italians think of themselves as if they reinvented the concept of the West. And so there are a series of readings one on top of the other. This is like, we are the Italians, we are giving you the new West. That's how they would describe this drawing. Certainly, Tony Smith, did that picture, and I don't know if I can take another description that he had. I said it before, he said ineffable ecstasy. The ineffable ecstasy, so when do you have an ineffable ecstasy? So, maybe in front of a masterpiece of art, or when you are confronted with some kind of spiritual and divine message, or when you're confronted to the immensity of the desert, landscape. That definition, the way he was describing the turnpike, meant that he wanted the viewer and the reader of Art Forum to understand that he was changing the position of that object. That object, this highway, does not belong to our mere and trivial life of commuters. No, it is in the realm of sublime. It is in the realm of relationship between infrastructure and landscape, or sculpture in the landscape. It deals with question of civilization, like this one here. It's not a highway. If you, in practical terms, all he did as an artist and design. Sorry, he was an architect. So I say art. I hope you don't mind that I use art as an overarching term to talk about creative thinking. But all he did was, let's look at the thing that we see every day with different eyes. And if I call it ecstasy, it's not a drug, it's mind ecstasy, meaning that we are in a different field. And so we are in this context where we don't know what is hold on, I understand there was one misconnection. The reason why I showed these megalithic societies pictures is because we don't know what the society stood for. We don't know if they were incredibly violent, if they were matriarchal, patriarchal, if they were capitalist, communist, if they were just killing every baby every two. We don't know nothing. Or we don't know if they were just in constant law with each other. We don't know if they were monogamous or if they were having orgies all the time. We literally know nothing. And so this, to me, maybe to you, to archaeologists, and to Tony Smith, stands for, this is a society that hasn't had the form that we know now, very much like the turnpike. At that stage, it's just an abstract thing in the middle of the landscape, and could be anything. So as soon as you start to put function, then it becomes more trivial. Okay, no, so if it's not a highway, then is it housing? Oh, that's boring again. But there is only a small moment, which is before it has a function, before you somehow repurpose it mentally, that it has that that ungraspable quality of being just pure ecstasy, pure questioning, pure doubt. And that's the strength of it, and the strength that you have when you are hallucinating in the desert because you don't know if you're going to make it back. That doubt is the doubt that keeps us moving forward as a society, as nomads. Then, I give you a few metaphors that you can connect it to. But so he was certainly thinking that he wanted to highlight the uncanny spirit of this thing that actually is as trivial as it gets. It's just a highway. And instead here it's, I don't know, if I put it without the right definition, I think I could have convinced you that it was a Roman aqueduct, and you would have believed it. No, it's almost it's disturbingly uncanny a bit, because you understand it. It is familiar, and yet it's not exactly what you use for. Obviously, the way the picture is being taken, it's not the way we look at the turnpike. The fact that there is this detail at the beginning on the concrete. Nobody takes a picture of an infrastructure, of a modular infrastructure like this from here, considering that this is exactly the same as this. So why would you play with photography to enhance the composition of that pillar? It's irrelevant, and yet, this picture is important because it's how he used communication, aesthetics, photography, composition to share that thought. That thought is this: ineffable ecstasy. But if you just say ineffable ecstasy, people don't really understand and say, okay, whatever, you had your trip. To communicate ineffable ecstasy, he picked this picture. And to me, I take it. I'm so disturbed by this black, aren't you? Like, what is that black at the beginning of the picture? And why is half of the picture, like, look how the composition it's very neat. He's a great photographer, so I used words to describe his work, but the reality is that here it's art and communication at its peak.
I assume we can agree that people can go to the Sistine Chapel. Most people can go and look at a Michelangelo or a Ghirlandaio and see some beauty in that. Very few people can go to the Passaic River, I think, and see some beauty in that. But certain people can, right? As evidenced by those photographs. So how does that enter into the conversation?
I think that most people in our society think that what we have there, it's understandable and pretty. But I'm not sure that it would be universally conceived this way. Universally doesn't exist, I know, but if you go and see the Sistine Chapel without having any understanding of the idea of God or the idea of a male white God, as a proof of that, specifically the Sistine Chapel, I can use a 1990s restoration which was done by Sony. Sistine Chapel was was lit by candles for 400 years. When Japanese, when Sony proposed the Vatican to do the restoration with archaeological experts from Italy and Japan, they started it, they finished it, and the colors were too bright, and the Vatican was very mad because they said that this looks disgusting and that's not the universal judgment as we know it. There was an aesthetic conflict, which was not the colors, which were much brighter because they were not with 400 years of smoke, were not acceptable. If you compare the books which are printed now to the books printed 35 years ago, I dare you to prove that they are, I mean, of course they are the same composition, but they are completely different paintings. And so, one. Second, Michelangelo was not universally and forever considered the greatest of the painters. For a long time, there are constant debate, even whether you prefer Raphael, Michelangelo, Botticelli. There are within the history of art, and this debate. If you are a pre-Raphaelite in 19th century Britain, you might not like Michelangelo and Raphael. This is an agreement that our society currently have. And I'm not a big fan of Raphael. I mean, as a I can explain it and I can tell you why you think you should like it, but if I'm confronted with a painting of Raphael, I don't vibrate. And believe it or not, because I am so much, I dove, into this literature, I could vibrate seeing the Turnpike. That I know that it's my brain making half of the process. I know that it's not the Turnpike itself, that it's better painted than a Raphael, but I don't vibrate. With Michelangelo, it's a bit of a different story because I think of him as the most critical of the historical painters, and I find it very contemporary. So I have a difficulty to say that the Sistine Chapel is disliked by me. I mean, I actually do like it. But I think an hypothesis, there were some studies of, so what could be considered, it's becoming harder and harder, obviously, to interact with people that don't have our own standards, and our own meaning as a society. So I guess it would be a good question for an alien, but because I don't think a person with a cognitive disability, without knowing what it's facing, I mean, I would have to see somebody with a cognitive disability picking Michelangelo over the Turnpike. I don't know. Would it?
When you talked about the guy who designed the airport terminal and his design process of, I guess what comes to mind is you're designing a chair, so you go climb a tree is the idea. How does that reflect a human experience?
No, it's okay. I think I oversimplify the whole process. It's not somebody calls you, offers you the job, then to answer the practicality of that job request, you go for a walk. No, it's more of a. So that's not what happened, and I shouldn't have simplified it like this. That experience had no direct impact on a design proposal for the air terminal. Zero. It's actually almost the opposite. Is given a direct opportunity that certainly for me, I don't know you, but when I get a commission, I turn off my cell phone. I don't answer anymore. My friends want to go for a pizza, and I say no. People want to take me out, and I say no. I have to concentrate. That's what I do when I get a commission, and instead, and so I reiterate. So what happens in my brain process is I get a commission, and so I give the best of what I can do to the mental development that I had prior to gaining the work. That guy instead, Robert Smithson, is telling us, I get the commission, and this is the opportunity to reposition myself in the world. It's like I go. You can do it in different ways. You can have an ecstatic experience. You can do a psychoactive substance. You can get. You can. I don't know. You can go for a 10 hours conversation with your best friend and argue with all the doubts you had in life. You can set yourself in fire in front of McDonald's. I don't know. Each one has a different way to cope and to accept its. So to cope with itself and also to start a new process, you know. So Robert Smithson's telling us when something new happens in your life, such as a commission, that's the moment where you stop, you breathe in, you breathe out, and you don't right away into solutions, into practicality, into design experience, because you need to, if you want not only to contribute to the world. That's a bit egocentric. Not you, not me. I mean, the work of a designer sometimes can be egocentric. That it's I propose something that it could be good for the others. Instead, what he's suggesting is, as soon as that you have that option of putting your ego out in the world, you don't. And you find a way compatible. I mean, that it's obviously you still need to eat. You still need to find a way to accomplish the commission you received. I'm not saying leave this university and walk for your life. That's not what I ask you, and that's not what I did. I'm saying we can learn from non-doing, from walking through spaces, from anti-walk, anti-art, anti-anarchitecture. Anarchitecture is a term that was invented by Matta Clark here. Do you know anarchitecture? Laurie Anderson, you know Laurie Anderson? Laurie Anderson, the greatest forgotten member, basically, of the relationship with Lou Reed. Well, in the relation, well, Lou Reed was he was the big guy. Now she's a star, but I'm saying Laurie Anderson, also say my loco, invented the concept of anti-architecture, anarchitecture. So here, this land produced concepts which were very valuable, even in the professional world of architecture, but are about non-doing, are about thinking of what are the options available to detach yourself from the obligation of doing. I mean, I know it's not easy to embrace the spirit, and certainly the working time doesn't allow us for that. Let me see if I can find a picture of that. So here, again, you know Gordon Matta Clark? Never heard of him? Well, one of the greatest designers in New York, even though he wouldn't call himself a designer. all he did was doing anti-architecture, so cutting things out and creating spaces which are obviously very interesting just by cutting. So, well.
So with that image of the infinite building in Utah
Yes.
and the line from the UAE, would you say it's one is abstracting the form or the idea of the building and the other's authoritarian about the line?
Authoritarian, yes, no? I think so. I think one... I mean, I actually think that they almost have nothing in common. One, it's an absurdity from a world where that was not even technologically conceivable, and therefore nobody would have thought that you could do that, to a moment in our society where the stupidest of the thought can actually be achieved. You can grow mushrooms in Mars. You can, I mean, not yet, but it's soon to arrive. You can have Walmart sold nuclear weapons, probably soon. I don't know, but you know, anything is possible in the way we live, and there is almost no connection between the two. However, there are some very interesting texts on how authoritarian governments, consciously or not, a lot of the times consciously, reinterpret radical artists, radical architects' work from 60s and 70s and use them in their day-to-day activity. There is, during some examples, Franco's, you know Franco, the Spanish dictators, fascist dictators across until 70s. Franco used surrealist design. Let me see if I can find that. Because Franco, I have to remember the name. Prison. No, it's not. Yes, but I don't remember the name of the inspired by surrealist. Let me see. I completely forgot the name of the jail. No, I cannot find it. Well, I will look into that. But there is one prison that has a torture room that it's copied one-to-one from a surreal drawing, from one of those techniques that in our architecture schools we use to think creatively. So authoritarian regimes often have used artworks, architecture which were produced for a completely different sector, for revolution, for progress, for protest. Okay, I'm going to change the name of a nation just because I don't want to go into a political issue, but like I call it GR. So GR studied how to enter the buildings for political warfare against the resistance movement in the past. By studying the book of Guy Debord that I was telling you before about, the Society of Spectacle, and specifically the idea of psychogeography. Military services of authoritarian regimes use contemporary art produced in the past because it thinks out of the box. So there is a problem with thinking out of the box too, and it's part of the reason why some of the artists started not to do. Cioè, just being creative was not a solution to the world problem, somehow, because you know you can use creativity anyhow you want. So that project by in Saudi Arabia, I think it's ridiculous. It's gonna it's I don't know how bad it's gonna age in 50 years. Probably it's gonna be I have no idea. I have no sympathy for that project. It works perfectly in terms of real estate development. You know, a line, it's what real estate wants. It's you put infrastructure on one line, on the left, on the right. There are buildings, and at some point, some people will use those spaces, and but it's so non-ecological sustain. I mean, it has all the possible worst things of our society. But still, aesthetically, if I say it's ugly, I'm kind of saying that it's ugly also what we seen 50 years ago. Maybe it's pretty aesthetically, but was that anyhow related to your question? Ah, here you go. That's the prison. It's a torture room done with so here it's a place where nobody could sit. You couldn't sleep because there is a slope in this volume. There are these circles are all a bit different, so you can never really concentrate. It's a torture room. Huh?